Welcome to the end of series special. In this episode, I'm going to take a look at trilogies. But before I do, what exactly constitutes a trilogy when referring to Spectrum-related titles? Is it that the same character appears in all three games? Is it that all three games are set in the same place, even though the characters may change? Or could it be that the games all have the storyline that continues throughout the series? Or even a mixture of all of those? And what about games that are not marked as trilogies? And yet, there are three titles in the series. With any of the three previously mentioned criteria? Well, let's have a little look then. Let's start with the Magic Knight trilogy. This began with Finders Keepers in 1985. Your quest as Magic Knight was to find a present for the King's daughter. You can collect items, trade items, and play the game in two different ways: treasure hunt or quest. The follow-up, Spellbound, was released the same year. Again, playing Magic Knight, you have to rescue a wizard from a castle after his spell goes wrong. The same gameplay ensues. And the last in the trilogy is Nighttime, released in 1985. Again, playing Magic Knight, you get transported to the future and you have to get back. More of the same with object collection and puzzle solving. The games were and are a favourite for players who enjoyed this type of game, and this was labelled as a trilogy, and it covers most of the criteria. I myself created a trilogy, the Kidcadet trilogy. In the first game, the character was a young apprentice, learning the ropes and making mistakes, which is why in the first game it's all about collecting fuel pods from a nearby moon, as he had forgotten this before his first mission. This is a simple platformer, with only one goal: collect all the fuel pods. The second game follows directly on, and sees him finally getting to that first mission. And that mission is to rescue a dignitary called Pobbleflew, who can be seen a few screens into the action. Another platform collection game, with the addition of locked doors and keys. And the final game, he has matured into a skilled fighter. He's on a mission to find out why a nearby planet has been attacked. He can now shoot things as well, and this game is more of a left-right scrolling shooter, with a few platform elements thrown in. The sprite changed to reflect not only the character's progression, but also my skills at drawing. This series also ticks most of the boxes when it comes to the criteria for a trilogy, and the titles are labelled 1, 2 and 3, although some websites do not list them as an actual trilogy. On to another one then, and different style of game, the Farmer Jack trilogy, released by Jonathan Caldwell. The first is Harvest Havoc, and it's a kind of Boulder Dash game. Controlling Farmer Jack, you have to ride around on your tractor collecting the harvest. As with the aforementioned arcade game, you can drop rocks onto chasing enemies. The second game takes more of an influence from the arcade game Ladybug. You drive around the maze in your tractor collecting dots. The maze though has doors that you can flip to block enemies. And the third game is Farmer Jack's Treasure Trove. A very similar game to the others. You ride around the maze collecting things while being chased by enemies that steal things, this series had more games added to it, so does this mean it's not a trilogy anymore? But then again, the 3 games were sold together by Chronosoft. And another style of game, Double Dragon. Based on the popular arcade title, released in the 90s, in the first game, released by Melbourne House, brothers Billy and Jimmy Lee head off to search for Billy's girlfriend who's been kidnapped. This is a typical left-right scrolling beat-em-up. Kick and punch your way across various levels, fighting the boss at the end. The second game, cunningly named Double Dragon 2: The Revenge, released by Virgin in 1989, continues the story with the same characters. Despite ridding the streets of the evil gangs, one person remained alive, Linda. She hid away and trained herself, ready for revenge. She learned how to use magic to bring back the dead, and now she wants to get her own back on Billy and Jimmy. Again, Billy's girlfriend is kidnapped, and again, Billy and Jimmy set off to rescue her. This game has the added mechanic of weapons that can be used. And finally we come on to the third instalment, Double Dragon 3: The Rosetta Stone, released by Storm in 1991. The story changes and sends the 2 brothers in search of the Rosetta Stone. Same game and characters, and the story does change a little bit to try and keep in with the other games. And because they're labelled 1, 2 and 3, I guess this is a proper trilogy. Continuing the fighting theme then, and Renegade, released by Imagine in 1987. Taking the arcade game and putting it on the Spectrum would be no easy feat, but this game did quite well. Beat people up, work your way to a boss fight and move to the next level. You're going to meet your girlfriend, but encounter a lot of gangs and thugs, and it's time to put your martial arts skill to the test. The second instalment arrived the next year, Target Renegade. Larger sprites here, and the usual martial arts mechanics. You can also use weapons dropped by other enemies. No real story in this one, just fight your way through 5 levels. And the final game, Renegade 3, was released in 1989, and goes a bit weird with its story. Your girlfriend has again been kidnapped, and you have to rescue her, but she's been taken back in time. Ah, yeah. So you have to battle through different time zones to rescue her. And in these zones you'll get to use your martial arts skills on dinosaurs, Egyptian mummies, medieval knights, and aliens and robots. I think they must have tried to cover every genre here. The game is not regarded as a classic though, but sadly this has to be considered a trilogy. Now let's move to game settings, in other words where the action takes place, and the biggest of course being the Star Wars trilogy, released by Domark and based on the arcade games from Atari, which took various elements from the first 3 Star Wars films. The games all take place in the same universe, created by George Lucas, and of course the same characters, although not all of them appear in all of the games. The first game, Star Wars, is a classic vector game replicated from the arcade. It features 3 separate sections from the film: space fights while approaching the Death Star surface, avoiding the laser cannons, and finally the trench scene. Despite the Spectrum's limitation, this game stood up well, although obviously lacked the speech and smooth movement of the arcade. The second game, Empire Strikes Back, has 4 levels to get through, again taking bits from the film. First you play Luke, and you have to stop Probots from sending pictures to the Imperial destroyers. Here you fly around the planet's surface and shoot anything that moves, really. The second part stays on the planet's surface, but this time facing the AT-AT walkers. Use of cables is employed to trip them up. The third part you play Han Solo, flying the Millennium Falcon through asteroids. At least that's according to the instructions, but looking on the RZX playback, there's a short space scene first. Then finally, you get to fly through the asteroids. They look more like footballs to me, but hey. Third in the series, Return of the Jedi. This game has different sections taken from the film again. First you control Leia, making her way through the forest on speeder bikes towards the Ewok village. The second part you play Chewbacca in a walker, heading towards the bunker to meet Han Solo. And here you have to shoot and avoid logs being thrown at you. And the third part you're back in the Millennium Falcon, in the depths of the Death Star, trying to blow it up. Now this game often switches between these different game modes, which can be a bit confusing. This was an official trilogy, and covers most of the criteria mentioned earlier. Another arcade conversion then, and Gauntlet. Gauntlet was not labelled really as a trilogy, but there were 3 games and 1 add-on pack. Based on the 4-player arcade game, the first title featured 4 characters, an elf, a wizard, a warrior and a Valkyrie. You know the game by now. You run around, shoot monsters, destroying generators, collecting food and treasure, and using keys to open doors. There's no story, just arcade action. We'll skip the Deeper Dungeons expansion for now and move on to the second game, cunningly named Gauntlet 2. The second game continued with this theme and maintained the same look and feel, but in essence this was just more levels. The third game, however, moved away from the top-down approach and went full 3D. The principal gameplay was the same, but it had a much deeper story this time. You had to free the world of Capra from evil, one country at a time. In other words, one level at a time. The game retains the 4 characters from the previous games, but adds more: a rockman, a lizardman, an iceman and a merman. The main mechanics are present. You move around, shoot things and collect treasure. Although not sold as a trilogy, the games were labelled 1, 2 and 3, so we can assume that, yes, that's a trilogy then. Dandere, Pilot of the Future. Acclaimed for its colourful graphics, this platform game won many awards when released by Virgin Games in 1986. The cartoon-like presentation won a lot of admirers too. An evil Mekon is threatening to send an asteroid to collide with Earth, unless he's allowed to rule the universe, so Dan sets off to sort it all out. Upon arrival, he must work out how the self-destruct works and blow up the asteroid before it gets to Earth. You control Dan, running around, shooting and gathering 5 parts that are required to set off the destruction sequence. Dan's enemy are soon back, in 1988, with the release of the second game, Mekon's Revenge. Mekon has created a new race called Super Teens and is going to send them to Earth to take over. Dan must find the ship and destroy it, and the Super Teens. This is a sort of Cybernoid style game, with Dan flying around on a space scooter. Again, great graphics and good gameplay. There was a special edition of this that came with Sinclair User, but the third game in the series came along in 1990, Dandere 3 The Escape. The Mekons are back and Dan has to stop them again. This time though, Dan's been captured. Luckily, he's escaped on board the huge satellite orbiting Earth, and now has to, well, escape. The game is very colourful, with large sprites, good sound and good gameplay. It involves transportation, exploration and shooting. What more do you need? On to another trilogy, and who remembers Ziggy? This nippy little character first appeared in The Pyramid, released by Quest Software in 1983, blasting aliens and trying to discover the true meaning of life. The instructions are heavily influenced by Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, with deep thought coming up with the answer to life, the universe and everything as 42. In short, Ziggy has to enter the pyramid and try and find out more. The game involves shooting aliens, gathering crystals, opening doors and moving to the next chamber. In the second game, Doomsday Castle, also released in 1983 by Quest, Ziggy is back, and this game is influenced by Lord of the Rings, if you read the instructions. In essence, you move around the room, shooting things, collecting crystals, and moving on. The third game in the series took a totally different approach, and moved away from the arcade-style game. Backpacker's Guide to the Universe again hints at Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy influence, and was labelled as Part 1, but sadly no more appeared. Ziggy is taking a break from his adventures and finds himself embroiled in yet another adventure. This time it's trying to stop the evil Scarfax from pulling the great plug on the universe. The game involves collecting different creatures while avoiding or shooting other things. All in silence, strangely. Moving to a more serene pace, and Trader. Trader was marketed as a trilogy, but really it was the same game with multi-loads. The story ran across all three titles on the same tape. You worked your way around, interacting with various things, buying and selling goods, and flying to different planets, and encountering many life forms as you go. A strangely cool game that I enjoyed playing. It was also released on the ZX81. Keeping with the slower pace then, and the Tolkien trilogy from Melbourne House, released by Boulder Dash. The three games in this trilogy were initially sold separately. The Hobbit, the classic graphic adventure, taking you on a journey as Bilbo trying to kill Smaug and get the treasure back. The second, Lord of the Rings, was the follow-up where you control multiple characters on the quest to destroy the ring. The story comes from the first book, The Fellowship of the Ring. And then came Shadows of Mordor, taking its story from the second and third book, and you control Sam or Frodo, or both if you want to. The quest is to kill Sauron to complete the story. I'm not sure what happened with this trilogy. Melbourne House wrote 2 games covering the Lord of the Rings, and then Boulder Dash added The Hobbit to create a trilogy. The Hobbit took place way before Lord of the Rings in the history of Middle-earth. At least they're all connected with characters, locations and story. Sticking with adventures for a while then, Level 9 produced some brilliant text adventures and then pushed them out into trilogies later, adding graphics and more text. An example of this is Jewels of Darkness. This trilogy included Colossal Adventure, Level 9's version of the first and classic adventure game, collecting treasure and taking it back to a small house to complete the game. The follow-up, Adventure Quest, continued the story years after the first, and does have some Tolkien references. For example, Minas Tirith is mentioned along with Middle-earth. Evil has again arrived in Middle-earth. Doesn't seem like a nice place to live really. You, as an apprentice, are chosen to undertake this heroic mission to defeat the evil wizard. And finally, Dungeon Adventure completes the trilogy, again continuing the story. With the evil wizard defeated, it's now time to grab the treasure. Sadly, on the way there, you are targeted by a spell that removes all of your weapons and magic, so really it's back to basic. Like the Silicon Dreams trilogy that came after it, all of the games started out as text adventures. In these new compilations, graphics have been added. Definitely a trilogy, because that's how it was marketed. Same characters, same location, and continuing story. Back to action games then, and the Sidab trilogy from Houston. 3D Space Wars started things off, piloting your ship against the evil Sidabs, who are intent on taking over the star system. This game took influences from Star Wars, I think. The next game continued the story, 3D Sidab Attack. Here you continue the fight, this time taking it to the streets of a city. You fly around the skyscrapers, tracking down and destroying Sidab enemies. And the third game, 3D Lunar Attack, takes the battle to the Sidab's home planet, in a bid to destroy their command base. Then, strangely, a fourth game arrived, with a completely different look and feel. Gone with a 3D shooting element, and in came a sort of 3D wandering about game. But anyway, let's stick with the trilogy. It was always going to be difficult to bring a classic 3D arcade racing game to the Spectrum, and so it proved to be with Outrun, released by US Gold in 1987. The graphics looked fine, in a static screenshot, but they moved like a slug in treacle. The screenshots on the box were mock-ups and showed elements that never made it to the game. It was sluggish, and I have said this before, but if you slow your brain down enough to be able to play this game, you would complete the training to become a fully fledged project manager. It's a stage versus time limit game, and comes with the arcade music on the other side of the tape. Well, that's at least something to be happy about. In a bid to speed the game up, and obviously cashing on the license, US Gold released Turbo Outrun in 1989. It scored higher than the first game in reviews and follows the same gameplay, but this time there are police chasing you. The graphics look great, and to help speed things up, there were allegedly less roadside objects, but the speed difference is hard to detect, and there are still plenty of roadside objects anyway. The AY music is a nice touch as well. The third game, Outrun Europa, was released in 1991 and was a bit of a mess. You start on a motorbike. The graphics are monochrome and at times look very distorted and difficult to see. Gameplay removes the stages, and it's just now one long journey from London to Berlin. There's also a mission involving secret files, but yeah, it's a racing game. You progress onto a jet ski, which looks quite poor, and eventually get to a car. Sinclair user claimed the graphics were big and dead colourful. Do they look colourful to you? Well, the game code was incomplete, and it was rushed out. And a choice was made to remove the colour before publication. You can get it back with a simple poke, but it looks even worse. Is this a trilogy then? Well, I'd probably say yes. Veering off from driving, do you see what I did there? Anyway, on to Boulder Dash. Released in 1984 by Frontrunner. You had to run around the screen, grabbing diamonds. As you moved around, the earth disappeared, which could result in the boulders above you dropping down, hence the name. The graphics were okay, I suppose, and the scrolling was character-based, but a decent enough game. The follow-up, Boulder Dash 2 Rockford's Riot, was released in 1985 by Monolith. Same gameplay, different levels, with a few tweaks here and there, where some screens had moving enemies to avoid. And the third game, simply called Boulder Dash 3, was released in 1986 by American Action. Same gameplay again, different graphic styles and different levels. Talk about milking a game design. There are some additions with moving enemies, and a bit of strategy about how to get round them, or kill them by dropping rocks on them. Yes, this is a trilogy, it's the same character in the same situation. What's really needed here though was a gun. Step forward, Joe Blade. Released on budget in 1987 by Players, this game became a favourite and scored highly in reviews. Our hero is on a mission to save 6 world leaders who have been kidnapped. On his way, he can also use keys to open doors and shoot or avoid the enemy. You have a time limit to do this, so you can't hang around. The cartoon-like monochrome graphics give it a certain charm, and playing the game is easy. Completing it though, not so much. A great title then, and it deserved a sequel. And so in 1988 it arrived in the form of Joe Blade 2. This time we get more screen use for the game, and the same great graphic style. The game moves into the streets of London, where gangs of punks and muggers rule. Joe has to rid the streets of this menace and return it to normality. No weapons here, just hand-to-hand, or in reality boot-to-head combat. To get rid of people you have to kick them in the head. You have to kill a set amount of punks in a time limit, and also rescue 16 citizens trapped in the streets. There are sub-games too which really don't need to be there. In 1989 the third game arrived, Joe Blade 3. Going back to the earlier style of the first game, you'd be forgiven in thinking that this was actually the same engine and sprites. Story follows on from the first game rather than the second, and has Joe rescuing kidnapped TV celebrities and pop stars. Yes, really. Your first mission is to rescue 6 hostages. The second mission is to capture the villain behind it all, Crack's Bloodfinger. The third mission to blow up the building by setting explosive charges around the place. Again, this has sub-games, and again for no real reason. You can find and use grenades, disguises and passes, etc. to help Joe on his quest. This is a great trilogy, but then a fourth game was announced. It never made it to publication though, so yes, this is a trilogy. And taking a sidestep for a moment, what about the Korth trilogy? This was a set of 3 packs that came with books, I think mainly aimed at the education market. Each pack had a tape that contained games relating to the story. I'm not going to go too far into this really, just wanted to give it a mention. Now we get into more dangerous territory, games that maybe, could have, might have been a trilogy, and we're going to start with Hunchback from Ocean. Hunchback was a conversion of the first part of the arcade game. You jump on the ramparts, swing on ropes, and try and rescue Esmeralda. A well-known but tricky game. Then came Hunchback 2. Here Ocean took the bits they left out of the first game and stuck them into a standalone title. More jumping and dodging to find Esmeralda. Then came 2 games, but only one of them made it to publication. Hunchback the Adventure. Again our hero heads off to rescue Esmeralda, who for some reason just can't stop getting kidnapped. This is a nice looking game, and although it takes the standard rescue story from the arcade game, it presents it as a text and graphic adventure. The fourth game, Hunchback at the Olympics, by Software Projects, never made it to publication. So, is this a trilogy or not? On similar lines, how about Monty Mole? Wanted Monty Mole, released in 1984, was the first game, and even had airtime on television due to its connections with the miners' strike at the time. This classic platform game was a big hit. Because of the game's success, the character then spawned multiple other titles. Monty is Innocent, released in 1985. In the very first screen of the previous game, Monty grabs a bucket of coal, and now he's been imprisoned for stealing it. You control Sam Stoat in a bid to free him. This subpar game continues the story, if you can call it that, and adds another character. Then came Monty on the Run in 1985, again continuing the story. Monty has escaped prison and is now on the run. He has to collect parts of an escape kit and try to make it to the ferry to complete his escape. A great platformer here, back to the standards of the first one. The story is continued and the character remains the same. Then a fourth game turned up, and more. Auf Wiedersehen, Monty. So now we have 4. Could we still call this a trilogy? And by the way, I'm not going to mention Dizzy. And how about Wally Week? This character began life in Automania, released by Microgen in 1984. A nice looking platform game where you control Wally building cars. Each level has 2 screens, one with a car to build and one with the parts required. You collect parts from screen 1 and take them to the second one. A great game, but Microgen were to move away from the platform variant for the next in the series. Pyjamarama, released in 1984, takes us more into arcade adventure territory. Here, Wally has to collect various things and use them to wake him up from his nightmare. Large graphics and decent gameplay, plus a few bonus screens such as the Space Invader level. Following that came Everyone's a Wally, arriving in 1985. Here you can play different members of the family in their quest to find the combination to open a safe. Lots of large, well-drawn and animated graphics again, and it set the standard for future Wally games, of which there were a few. So, again, is this a trilogy? Especially when there were more than 3. Initially it probably would have been, until the 4th one arrived. But what about games with more than 3 titles? At some stage they were trilogies, and then a 4th game or 5th game got added. Also, let's not forget games that were not really branded as trilogies, but had things in common. Like the Daley Thompson games. First there was Daley Thompson's Decathlon, followed by Daley Thompson's Super Test, and then Daley Thompson's Olympic Challenge. Are these just cashing in on a name, or should they really be listed as trilogies? The public seems to like trilogies. There are book trilogies like Lord of the Rings, a set of 3, or in my case 1 massive book containing all 3 novels. I read this a very long time ago and quite enjoyed it. And along similar lines, another one of my favourite fantasy books was Memory, Sorrow and Thorn by Tad Williams, a masterpiece of writing and highly recommended if you like Lord of the Rings. The 3 books in the original trilogy were fantastic, but I never got round to reading the 4th, which got added later. Book trilogies very often went on to add more titles, like the previous one. For example, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. What a fantastic trilogy that was, and I've read this multiple times and got the audio CDs, etc. And then a 4th book got added, and then a 5th. Again, I've read those and enjoyed them. And then of course we have films, so many trilogies here, most of which went on to become franchises. Rocky, Alien, Die Hard, Mission Impossible, Star Trek, and many, many more. I suppose if we like the character or characters, which is mainly what films set out to do, then the public are going to pay to see what happens next. Keeping on the movie subject then, as time passed, more and more games were looking to link into other major franchises, many of which had their own trilogies. Robocop was a massive hit in the cinemas, and in 1988, Ocean released their first game tie-in. Our ironclad hero is set to clear the streets, trying to find criminals responsible for your own death, even though you're not really dead anyway. A Z80 processor and a ULA, and you're good to go. The game has multiple levels, including a left-to-right shooter, with some nice graphics here. A target segment where you have to shoot someone with a hostage, and a poor face-matching thing that really doesn't need to be there. Nice graphics and good gameplay saw the game do well in reviews. The cunningly named Robocop 2 arrived the same year, Ocean looking to cash in on the license, no doubt. Again, a game with multiple levels, including the usual left-right walk and shoot sections, but this time with added jumping routines to get onto higher platforms. There's also some sort of strange Boulder Dash thing, where you're trying to patch up memory banks. And a target shooting game, all with a story around it and nice intro sections. And of course, where there's money to be made, a trilogy will be completed, and Robocop 3 arrived in 1990. More target shooting, which hints at Operation Wolf. More blasting while walking and jumping on platforms. And Robocop gets a jetpack. Maybe they ran out of ideas by now, and they'd used so many ideas from other games over the years that they thought they might as well steal jetpack as well. Anyway, from jetpacks to whips and Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones also had a trilogy of games, the first being linked to the second film, oddly. Released in 1987 by US Gold, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, for me the best of the films, sees you taking the role of Indy on a quest to recover the Sankara stones and free children kidnapped by Moolah Ram. This takes segments from the film, sort of. First you have to run around the mines, freeing the children while being chased by the henchmen and, of course, snakes. Then onto the minecart sequence, a brilliant action piece in the movie, but not so exciting in the game. Another whip-cracking level ensues, where you have to collect one of the stones, and then repeat the whole thing. In 1989, this was followed by Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Graphic improvements and a change in style made this a better game for me. Large sprites and some platform action all the way through, as Indy searches for rare artifacts. I can't help think that this is just a version of Fred by Quicksilver with larger graphics. Does this part look familiar to anyone? As the game moves on, there's a train sequence and a puzzle matching sequence that really doesn't need to be there. A slower paced game then that looks great and plays really well. And the final game was not based on a film at all. Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, released in 1992, was also a game for the 16-bit machines along with PC and Mac. On those formats, the game was a point-and-click adventure. On the Spectrum though, we get this weird 3D thing, where the only thing that happens in the first few minutes is Indy beating up someone in a casino. Hardly the non-stop excitement of the movies. The scenery does change, but the pace is just too slow, and Indy can vanish behind walls, making it tricky to see where he is. From whips to hoverboards and Back to the Future. The first game released by Electric Dreams in 1985 didn't do well review-wise. You play Marty McFly. Having travelled back to the future, your task is to ensure your parents meet up and fall in love. To do this you have to collect various things like love letters, and as you progress, the family photograph, bottom right, becomes more complete. There's a lot of walking about to do, really slowly. No wonder this game got poor reviews. The second game, Back to the Future Part 2, was released in 1990. Now we have a completely different game style, and 5 separate sections representing parts of the film. First you skateboard, or should that be hoverboard, along a street, avoiding things and collecting things, trying to get to the town hall. This is shown in 2D first, and then switches to 3D later on. Once you do this, you then have to get Jennifer out of the house, and this switches to a top-down view that, although looks colourful, it's difficult to really see what's going on. Next we get a sort of beat-em-up, where you have to fight your way to the DeLorean. Then we get some sort of poor tile movement game, and no reason for this to be in here. And then it's back to the hoverboard style game again. The third game, released in 1991, we find that Doc has gone back to 1885 by accident but wants to stay there, leaving Marty a letter telling him where the car is so he can get back to his own timeline. When Marty finds the car, he notices a gravestone close by with Doc's name on it and a date just a few days after he sent the letter. Marty has to go back and save him. When they get back, the first thing they have to do is save somebody else, Clara, who's stuck on a bucket board, whatever that is, heading for a cliff. You're riding a horse and have to jump obstacles and shoot people chasing you. Next we switch to the overhead view for the same chase sequence. And then back to a side view again. And then back to an overhead view with different scenery. Eventually we get to the next proper level, a shooting gallery. Okay. Well, to be fair, it's done quite well really. Nice graphics and sound. but I think this is just a filler. Next we get pie throwing. Yes, really. It's not a bad section actually, with nice graphics and sound again. And then we get the final part. You have to push a DeLorean to 88 miles per hour using a train. And here you run across the top of the carriages, just like that old favourite, Stop the Express. Not a bad set of games, but they were all variations of things that have been done before. From the movies to television then, we find Mask, released in 1987 by Gremlin Graphics. In the first game, you have to rescue 2 agents from each of the 4 locations. This is not as simple as it seems, and you first have to find your own mask, and then find an agent, and then find their mask. To do this, you have to collect a variety of different things, such as bombs and keys. The game consists of a smooth scrolling top-down view as you move around shooting the enemy. The same year the follow-up, Mask 2, arrived. The game completely changed the look and feel. Now we have a horizontal shoot and rescue game. The graphics can look a bit comical at times, but they're well drawn and brightly coloured, and there's plenty of action. You can swap between various vehicles depending on what you need to do. There's a flying car, a truck and a buggy. You have to simply locate Venom, the evil force, forever trying to do evil things, as evil forces do. No fear, Mask is always on standby, and now you've been called to act. There are several levels with slight changes in graphics. The third game arrived in 1988, and here we get another change of game design, and this reminds me very much of Exelon. Some nice graphics here, and you can head left to right on your mission to rescue your brother from the evil Venom. Like the aforementioned game, you run, jump and shoot your way across a landscape, battling your way to victory. This game completes the trilogy, and I think we all can agree we can call it a trilogy. Okay, let's really slow things down now. Virtual Worlds was a compilation of 3 games, plus a bonus game. So is it a trilogy? Well, we'll presume it is. Released by Damark in 1991, this compilation contained Castle Master, Driller and Total Eclipse. All 3 games had nothing in common really, other than that they used the same 3D drawing engine called Freescape, and they all came in this compilation. Driller had a sequel in its own right, so did Castle Master, and so did Total Eclipse. Now that's confusing. I think we should move on. It's technically not a trilogy just because it uses the same drawing routine. Let's speed things up now with the Samurai Trilogy, released by Gremlin Graphics in 1987. Not individual games, but a single release with multiple parts. And a game that's not really all about fighting. You have to allocate points to different skills, then there's training in each of those skills, none of which I could actually do. And although I had no idea what I was doing, I ended up in a fight for some reason. Yeah, I don't think we can call it a trilogy. Moving on. And next, a series of games I could never get to grips with. Spy vs. Spy, released by Beyond in 1985. I know it was popular, but it was a 2-player game and I never had anyone to play with. You can, however, play against the Spectrum. Both players control their own spy and have to set traps for the other, while carrying out a mission. The play area for both players is visible at the same time. In the first game, you have to get to a plane on a nearby runway, and to do this, you have to get out of a building, and to do that, you need 4 objects. You run around searching for the objects, with the added element of setting traps for the other player. The second game, The Island Caper, released in 1987, is pretty much the same thing, but on an island, and you have to find 3 parts of a missile and escape. The graphics have been improved unless you prefer the lines of the first game. The third game in this self-proclaimed trilogy, released in 1988, was named Arctic Antics, and yes, you guessed it, it's the same game, but in a different location. You have to collect 3 things to be able to launch a rocket. Same gameplay, and I still can't see the attraction. Still more to think about. How about football then? Let's start with Match Day, released in 1984 by Ocean and written by John Rittman. This was heralded as the ultimate football game. Despite not being a fan of football games, I can appreciate the game itself. You select a team and run around trying to score goals. This was followed by International Match Day in 1986. What was different, I hear you ask? Well, more menus, more customization, international tournaments with knockouts, and 128k improvements. Goals show the players celebrating and the crowd getting excited. The final and third game, released in 1987, oddly called Match Day 2. More of the same, but with many features added and all available via a larger and more complex menu system. Things added in this version included back passes and ball deflection. You could also control the power of your shots and barge into other players. The sprites are greatly improved in my opinion, and the game feels much smoother. An improvement that scored well in reviews. Let's staying with football and Football Manager by Addictive Games. I think we're all familiar with this. You take control of a football team and, well, manage them. Sell and buy players, choose the lineup and watch the highlights. I know many people got heavily involved with this, but not myself. Apparently it was the very first Football Manager game. Fans of this had to wait a long time to get the sequel, 6 years in fact, and in 1988 Football Manager 2 arrived. And if fans were not already spoilt for choice, the third game arrived in 1991. Looking a bit more slick, with a view of your office and giving you access to things like fixtures, buying and selling, and of course bank accounts. Let's move away from strategy and onto platform games again. Ollie and Lisa was released in 1986 by Firebird Software. This cartoon-like game has you trying to save a Scottish castle from being bought and taken to America stone by stone. To do this, you have to collect 8 things that will make the ghosts in the castle become invisible and scare the prospective buyers. Not sure how that works. If you can't see a ghost, how is it scary? Anyway, the usual platform antics ensue, with colourful graphics, nice animations and good sound. The second game, Ollie and Lisa 2, Halloween, was released in 1990 by Silverbird. Set in the castle saved in the previous game, but a new character is introduced, Arabella the Fairy. After baking a cake that went wrong and exploded, the castle is in a mess and no one can find anything. Ollie and Lisa need to attend a Halloween party, so things need to be tidied up. Arabella flies around on her broomstick looking for 16 things. The speed of the game is faster than the first one, with some nice graphic touches and animation. The third game, Ollie and Lisa 3, The Candlelight Adventure, was released in 1989. Hang on, that's before the second game. Are those dates right? Anyway, the task in this one is to rebuild Ollie's car, that someone has dismantled and scattered about the castle. Much larger sprites in this game, and the usual platform elements are here. There are some great graphic touches too, Ollie looking bemused when he makes contact with something, and talking on the telephone for example. There are problems though. The doors that you can go through will take you to random rooms, and do not always return you to the previous room you came from. This makes it a bit tricky to play. There are some good elements here, but the random door thing is really a no-go for me. And this is definitely a trilogy. But I'm still unsure about those dates. Anyway, keeping the cartoony look, how about Postman Pat? Released in 1989 by Alternative Software. This looks like it's aimed at kids really, and it's a bit dull. You drive your van very, very slowly around the town, making deliveries. You first have to get a parcel, which takes forever, and then go off in your van to deliver it. Not really action-packed, is it? Will the sequel do any better? Postman Pat 2 was released in 1989 and changes the look of the game completely. Using the map on screen, you control Pat on his journey to deliver letters by hand because his van has broken down. Houses expecting letters will flash on the map, but then you have to work out how the map works when moving in and out of the screen. There are other elements too, like getting things repaired, but it's still a ponderous game aimed at the younger player, I think. How about the third one? Will that get any better? Postman Pat 3 To the Rescue was released in 1992. A slow driving game. Has this been specially slowed down for project managers? Pat must help his friend, delivery man Dan, to deliver telephone directories. He drives around the town, throwing them at doors, in a kind of paperboy style. Slow, slow, and a bit more slower. Yes, it's a trilogy, but not one to play. Let's lighten things up then, and back to another of my trilogies, Tufi. The first game, Tufi in Fanland, was released in 2012 by myself. This little creature began life in a one-off game, where gravity is flipped when he encounters a fan. The game later went to a real physical release with improvements. You guide Tufi around collecting nuts, and that's it. In 2013, the sequel arrived with a change of gameplay. In Tufi's Winter Nuts, you guide him around a map, trying to get nuts back from the thieving squirrels. A typical platform game here, with locked areas that require a certain amount of nuts to be collected before allowing access. Seven years later, in 2020, mainly due to a certain handheld device, I released Tufi's Nutty Nightmare, designed to be played on the small screen. This simple yet fun game has Tufi again collecting nuts, but this time on a single screen as the deadly objects get nastier. This is a trilogy, and it was always meant to be one. I'm sure you can point out more Spectrum games that either were a trilogy or could have been, but for now, I think we've had enough.